College. Thank you all for being here today. Before we get started, I'd just like to take a quick moment to say a quick word about today's event and thank a few people that are here with us today. Today, we are joined by Professor Dr. Dulio and Professor Nicole Matthew from Oakland University. We also have some other people in the audience. Our Time joined us today for a voter engagement group that's linked with the League of Women Voters to help do some registration in the front of the event before we started. I have to thank Nicole McKee, who's been wonderful. She's the Director of Government Relations here at Macomb, really helped put this event together, so thank you so much. And I see a number of staff and students from various classes of mine and some students I don't recognize, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. This is really an event we hope for you to be here. So Professor Dulio here runs the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University, and with great support from the President's office here at Macomb Community College, they were invited to share their thoughts today on the presidential primary post Super Tuesday. This is our first event that we've partnered with Oakland University, and we hope to do more events like this in the future around civic engagement. I know that the president at Macomb shares my view that as a higher education institution here in Macomb County, we have a great opportunity, and I really think a duty to provide this type of programming to students, faculty, staff, and members of the community. And also, we have the responsibility to keep these conversations not just civic-oriented, but also civil in nature. So please be respectful as we go through the event. That would be very kind of you. Also, obviously, we have a microphone here, so I have a number of the people in the audience are my students, so we got some questions primed and ready to go. And we also, we welcome your questions as we're going through the event though. So if you do have questions, I'm gonna move this microphone and leave it on right at the front here. So if you do have a question at any time, please feel free to come and ask it. I'll be pausing throughout the event and making sure that we have opportunities to hear from you. And then those of you that are in the Zoom chat that I can see, please don't hesitate as we're going to raise your hand, and I will be sure to get your question in as well, okay? And with that being said, let me just transfer this mic real quick.
Ryan, as you're moving that mic, let me say, first off, thanks to you for hosting us. Thanks for your interest in doing this. Thanks to Nicole and everybody here at Macomb Community College for your interest in doing this. Just a quick pitch about what we're trying to do through these events. This is a regular one that we have through the Center for Civic Engagement called Office Hours. And it is an attempt to highlight faculty experts around topical, timely issues, right? So we're in the middle of a presidential election cycle already, believe it or not, right? And so this is the topic for today, but we've done, you name the issue, we've probably done it. So, and we do 3 or 4 from the semester. I'd love to bring it back to MCC here and do it again. You all have such wonderful facilities. We would, right, Nicole, we would kill to have a, Mr. Berlini, nice to see you. Thanks for being here. We would kill to have one like this on our campus, I think. Well, maybe not kill, but you know what it is. Anyway, so yeah, these are, and we call it office hours because we want it to be an informal chat, right? Think about students, right? If you go to see a professor, you just go and try to ask some questions, figure some stuff out. For the more seasoned members of our audience, we want you to think back to when you were in college and went to visit your professors and had a chat with them. So that's what we're trying to do, and it's all question-based. As Ryan said, right, informal, ask a question whenever you want, and let's have an interesting discussion today about presidential politics.
Yeah, and I did get a chance to thank people, but I do want to again thank Clerk Forlini too. I missed you, I didn't see you, and I see that you also brought some of your staff with us today too. It was very helpful with some of the students as they walked in, so thank you for that as well. So it's great to see. What's that?
You must have been bad during the back row.
But yeah, I appreciate all of this. It's great to see collaboration on all these issues, getting people turned out to vote. And with that being said, let's jump right into our first question. I sort of took some of these questions that were proposed and tried to group them together. And I did say I want to keep this civil, but starting off with this one, we just saw Nikki Haley suspend her campaign. And we know that there wasn't any real serious challenge to Biden in the primary election. So this is a weird kind of time where we would think to see that we may be in any other election, we might be having a conversation about primaries, but we're already ready, it seems like, to have a conversation about the or about the general election now that the candidates have essentially been consolidated, the parties have chosen their candidates, we're entering this general election phase. So the question that I've got from a lot of students that I asked beforehand is how did we end up here? Is that polls are overwhelmingly showing that both candidates are very unpopular, but we are seeing a repeat now of what the election that we had in 2020. So how did we end up from this primary season to already a rematch in 2020?
Right, well, it does seem like Donald Trump is kind of unusual, but I think any election that he's in, he has kind of that element of curveballs coming from somewhere. But I think what's not surprising is that when you have people that have already held the office and they're running again, they're hard to dislodge. And we had an incumbent president, Biden, running. There were some that opposed him, but not anyone really serious. And on the Republican side, we actually had a lot of serious contenders, the former vice president, former governors, members of Congress that were opposing him, but none seemed to be able to dislodge him. And I think it's really not that surprising. He was previously the president, still pretty popular in the Republican Party, so just hard to build a coalition that's going to defeat someone who's already held office.
Yeah, I would put it, I would agree with everything Nicole said. I think incumbency matters, right? I mean, Joe Biden was always going to be the Democratic nominee. He's the incumbent, right? And nobody serious was going to challenge him. And to some extent, Donald Trump is an incumbent, right? I mean, he's seeking the office that he's had before. He's not an incumbent, but he's going back for another bite at the apple, right? And seeking to be the only person since other than Grover Cleveland to serve 2 terms as president non-consecutively, right? Same thing happened with Grover Cleveland. So Trump has immense power within the Republican Party, terrific popularity with the Republican base. And I think an even bigger factor is the fact that his base, which isn't necessarily the same as the Republican base, his base is incredibly loyal. And they're not wavering in their support of him. So, while there were these other viable contenders for the nomination, I think even as far back as, 5-6 months ago, we could have said Trump versus Biden, and here we are.
At the same time, it wasn't necessarily a runaway for Donald Trump. He lost 40% of the vote in New Hampshire, 40% in South Carolina, even when it looked like his election was a foregone conclusion. Still 20% of the electors turning out to vote for someone else. So I think that does say he has some work to do for the general election to really unite those other elements of the Republican Party that were ready for something else.
Excellent. So this kind of leads into my next question, what you were just talking about, Nicole, is how important, and this is a question I heard from the students too, is how important is the primary in determining the election? What kind of boost does it give candidates when they're coming out of the primary, winning the primary, going into the convention? Because the primaries have already ended so far before the conventions, you usually see like a convention bump, right, of the candidates, going up in the polls. What have you seen in the polls around that? Did you see anything happening where, where either candidate, when they've kind of quote unquote now won the nomination, any changes there around how people are feeling about them?
I would say a couple things about that. Number one, the opinions about both of these individuals, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, are solidified, right? They are baked into the American public. There's not many people out there who are, waffling on whether or not they think Trump's a good guy or Biden's too old, right? People know what they think about him. But for that reason, I think that you've seen and are going to see some pretty good consistency where the polling numbers are, right? And I think it's just baked in at this point.
It's kind of an unusual primary season where we didn't really have much of a contestation in either party. In the past, you usually have like an incumbent running for one, or maybe a vice president that is seen as the clear front runner, and then there's a real battle in the other primary. In this case, we didn't really have a battle in either one. Interesting battle maybe heating up for the vice presidential nomination for the Republicans. But I think both candidates are probably just glad to have the primary behind them, and they can focus all their resources on the general election.
I had so many people ask about the primaries in terms of third parties. Specifically, why is there no primary for third party candidates for students that voted in a primary the first time and they had to choose Democrat or Republican a ballot? So they were curious why that happens in politics in here in Michigan. And then also, why is there no opportunity to choose a candidate for a third party in a primary election?
Well, I'll say the United States is actually very weird in that we actually have a say in who the nominees are for the parties. In most other countries, the party just gets together and decides who their nominee is, and that's who you get to vote for. So I don't think it's that unusual that we don't weigh in on the third party candidates. Really, their shot is at the general election. I think the last time we had a significant kind of convention for deciding a nominee for a third party would be the Reform Party in 2000. There was a lot of kind of money at stake because they had performed well in 1996, and that entitled them to some federal financing. And so there were a lot of people looking to get their hands on that money. And I think Pat Buchanan ended up getting the nomination for the Reform Party that year. But normally the third parties will just have a convention or an internal decision to decide who their nominee is going to be.
Yeah, and that's a good point about primaries in general, right? What's the purpose of a primary? It is to take a bunch of individuals from the same party and narrow it down to one so that that person appears on the general election ballot, right? So we're not electing anybody. All we're doing in a primary is helping a party figure out who its candidate is going to be, right? And I think that there's a case to be made. I'm not saying I would make it. Everybody yells at me. I'm not saying I would make this case, but to not have primaries, to not do it. It's an internal party decision that in this case, the state of Michigan is spending a bunch of money to assist, right? We are spending millions of dollars at the state to conduct primaries when all we're doing is assisting with an internal party choice, and makes a bunch more work for the clerks like Mr. Perlini, and it was a big nightmare. And we could do away with it, and the parties would still go on, and we'd still have general elections. But there's all sorts of other considerations there. But it's good to think about that. And the reason you have to make a choice between I want the Democratic ballot or I want the Republican ballot is in Michigan we don't have what's called party registration, where you, in some states, you go and when you register to vote, you have to declare your party affiliation and register as a Republican, register as a Democrat, register as a member of the Green Party, or unaffiliated, whatever they determine, independent, right? And in those states, they can have what's called a closed primary, where only registered Republicans or only registered Democrats would participate in their party's primary. But here in Michigan, we have open primaries because we don't have party registration, and anybody can vote in either one. So you just have to go and say, you're basically saying, I want to be a Democrat for a day or a Republican for a day.
There are other options besides that, like the state of California uses a top two primary, and so all the parties are essentially running on the same ballot in the general election, and then the top two, or in the primary election, and then the top two go on to the general election. And there could be some advantages for that in terms of, third parties getting in the mix. Also, I think what happened in California is you had two Democrats advance to the general election, so that can happen in the top two primary. But it's another option, and more states have moved towards that system in the last decade. So it could be something that other states decide they want to move towards.
And that's an interesting thing too, because I think one of the supposed benefits of the top two primary is that it's you're likely to get fewer extreme candidates right? That, you know, maybe you get, say, an extreme Democrat but then maybe a more moderate Democrat. So that when the general election comes around, all the Republicans are gonna vote for the less extreme Democrat, and that moderates maybe the outcomes, right? So I'm not sure if we have any empirical evidence to demonstrate that, but that's the theory.
What about leading to that sort of like the question of crossover voting? I had a few students ask that in terms of if you are, let's say, for instance, a Republican, you know you're going to vote for a Republican in the general election, but you really think that there's maybe a better candidate that your Republican candidate could run against in the Democratic election. So they go actually vote in the other party's primary. Did you see any instances of crossover voting in this primary or it affect other primaries in other states?
Yeah, anecdotally, I know people that crossover voted, and I think I strong-armed my husband into crossover voting. But I think that it probably normally has a negligible impact because some people crossover vote to vote for a more moderate candidate. They don't want to see an extreme candidate win. And some people cross over to vote for the extreme candidate because they think their party is going to be more capable of defeating an extreme candidate than a moderate candidate. So a lot of times it's not going to have a huge impact because those things kind of cancel each other out. But a concerted effort to get crossover voters sometimes can make a difference, especially if you have one primary that's not really contested much, and then people will want to vote in the primary that's going to, maybe their vote is more likely to make a difference in that primary. And I think it might have helped Nikki Haley in New Hampshire to get some more voters because there wasn't really a Democratic contest. Biden wasn't even on the ballot in New Hampshire, so that might have helped her in New Hampshire. In Michigan, I don't know if it made that much of a difference because I think some people wanted to vote Democratic ticket so that they could vote uncommitted, and maybe some people wanted to vote Democratic ticket to prove that Biden had a lot of support. So it might not have made as much of a difference in Michigan as it could have.
Yeah, I think this is maybe a good point then to shift to maybe more of the kind of general election questions. And some of my students watched this before, but those that didn't watch it, there was a short video that Dr. Dulio was into, and it was talking about the importance of Michigan. So what is the importance of Michigan in a presidential election? What does it mean to be a swing state? Just how important will it be in 2024? What did we see from 2016 to 2020 to now 2024? What can we predict as, you know, political scientists to imagine the outcome? And again, how important is, for a lot of people in this audience today, they're going to be voting for the first time. Being a swing state, being a state that matters, how important is their vote?
So what can we predict? Not much. I mean, this is it's social science still, right? It's messy. So we'll start with, there's a lot to unpack there, but we'll start with the swing state, right? So the swing state is exactly what you might expect. It is a state that swings to a result in one election to a different partisan result in another, and then maybe back again, right? So in 2016, Donald Trump wins Michigan by less than 11,000 votes, red state. Helps him win the presidency. 2020, Joe Biden wins by 154,000 votes. Blue state, helps him win the presidency. 2024, Michigan is going to be front and center on the national stage in terms of importance and attention that we get because we can predict it's going to be close, right? It's going to be close because of places like Macomb County. We are in the hotbed of the battle for the White House, right? That sounds so hyperbolic and cliche, but it's true. I mean, it is absolutely true. And what it means is that we are going to be inundated with the candidate surrogates, television ads, digital ads, mail, right? I mean, it is going to be an onslaught of campaign communications with everybody seeking to win the state, and because it might tip the balance.
Yeah, I would say being a swing state's a huge deal. I grew up in Nebraska, not a swing state, but right next to Iowa, which was like the pretty girl at the prom that everybody wants to ask out. And they got all kinds of visitors. Well, we got their ads too, because they buy in the Omaha media market. But it's a big deal to be a swing state. And Iowa they had 5 electoral votes, or 5 or 6 electoral votes. So it's not a huge win. Michigan's got quite a few electoral votes. It's kind of big for a swing state. So I would expect just a huge ad bonanza. If there's anyone here, if you want to see a presidential candidate live, check your email, read the newspaper. You will be able to do it this fall. If you are paying attention and you have a flexible schedule, you will be able to see one, I guarantee you.
There's an old saying about not being able to swing a cat and not hit something, right? I mean, you won't be able to swing a cat in Michigan this fall and not hit a presidential candidate or one of their surrogates. They are going to be here a lot.
So kind of following up on that is why, I had a lot of students ask why, did we see Michigan go from red in 2016 to blue in 2020? And then, what, if do those explanatory factors you say to political scientists, right? We have a hard time describing things. We have a really hard time explaining things. We have almost an impossible time predicting things, right?
You don't give us much credit.
Right. But you said it, not me.
Fair.
But what if any indicators from 2016 and 2020 would you point to that you saw the swing state, the Michigan swing from red to blue, and then can those indicators tell us anything about 2024?
You want to go first? Okay, I'll go first. I'd say
And sorry, let me just say indicators, but issues too. Like students are particularly interested in what type of issues. You could also bring in what type of issues are being elevated this election.
I happen to think that this might be the most issue-less campaign that we've ever seen. We can come back to why that is, but I'll give you 2 reasons for the swing and potential swing again in 24. Turnout and independent voters, quote unquote independent voters, right? We think about Donald Trump in 2016, he excited the Republican base. He brought new Republicans into the party in places that had been ignored by many candidates previously. Lots of places in rural counties in Michigan, up north, Upper Peninsula, saw enormous percentage increases, big percentage increases in voter turnout. And also independents. You think back to 2016, we had Trump and Clinton. Hillary Clinton would have gone down in history as the most disliked presidential candidate ever if it wasn't for Trump, right? I mean, nobody liked either choice then. And I think a lot of independent voters in places like go next door to Oakland County, a lot in Kent County, a lot of independent voters were willing to give Trump a chance, and they voted for him. And then in 2020, they're like, not doing that again. I've seen what that has wrought and passed, right? But at the same time, in 2020, the Biden campaign, the Democrats did a really good job of turning out their voters, right? So whoever can get enough of the independents and turn out their supporters, whoever does that best, wins.
I think that the Trump campaign struggled with the college-educated voters in 2020 that have previously been a big part of the Republican Party. And it looks like the suburbs might be a particular focus for the Trump campaign this time around because of the struggle in the previous election. I think 2016 was actually really bad turnout for African-American voters who have previously been very excited by Obama and were not as excited by Clinton. And I think you saw that turnout kind of bounce back in 2020. And so we'll look at Democrats trying to do their best to turn out Black voters to a high degree in this election also.
Yeah, and just to put a point on that, Hillary Clinton got 80,000 fewer votes in Wayne County alone in 2016 than Barack Obama got in 2012. 80. And Trump wins by 11,000. right? So yes, the African-American vote did not show up for Hillary Clinton. It did, yeah, and it was better for Biden. But I mean, there's a big debate now about, African-American support seems to be going up for Trump and down for Biden. I mean, I think that, and Donald Trump doesn't need to win the African-American vote to win. He just needs 25%, 30% nationwide, right? That would do.
In a close election, every single voting block is gonna be important. So you can say Trump couldn't win without X, Biden couldn't win without X, so everything's gonna be important.
Especially the youth vote, right?
Well, I mean, I hear from our students at OU, I mean, we get to pick from two 80-year-old dudes, right? I mean, woo, good times, right? I mean, I'm sure that they're have the same opinion as you, that, or your opinion is the same as them, that you think they can relate to what you care about, that, or your life, or what issues are important to you. I see, there's a head shake over there. Yeah, I mean, they're 60 years older than you. They're half a century older than you, right? And those are our choices. Good
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, and this I think is a good time to remind, please, does anybody have any questions? Would anybody like to, yeah, please, Mason, could you please come up to the microphone though?
Just yell.
Okay, well, let me just repeat his question so that people can hear it online.
So I have a question, with the primaries being so much in the favor of the 2020 president, what if there be like, I feel like there would be like a problem, and there would be a massive disconnect between the youth and the older president. So why do they keep electing or nominating these old presidents to go up there for us to vote for them? And there's just such a disconnect, and especially with a lot of their previous histories and their presidencies, with all of their allegations and all that stuff that came out over these prior years. Why do they keep continuing to choose these older presidents when they could give some new blood into the House?
So the question is, why do we keep getting old people for our candidates, right? I mean, that's the fair description.
Well, I don't know if this will make you happy to know, but this is not isolated to presidential elections. This is every office in our government. There's a huge advantage to the person who has already been there, already has name recognition, already has fundraising dollars. And parties don't always like to see a contested primary. They kind of like to see it wrapped up nice and tidy, fast. So there's a lot of incentives pushing towards just electing the same people over and over again. I think there was like multiple incidents in the last year. Mitch McConnell's brain freeze. Dianne Feinstein was actually declared mentally incompetent to run her estate, but still like on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So there's a lot of like old politicians, and this isn't a new thing either. When I was in high school, I visited Washington, D.C., and I saw Strom Thurmond being carried into the Senate in order to vote on a bill. So this has been going on for a long time.
If you don't know the Strom Thurmond, he's a guy from South Carolina who died while serving in office. He didn't die in his office, but he was an elected official and he died. It was 100. It was 100. And to answer your question, they don't trust that you're going to turn out. That's why, right? I mean, we have this long history of candidates for office ignoring young people, and they ignore you because you don't turn out. The only way to break that is to actually show them that you are reliable voters. But yeah,
So I understand that, but with this massive disconnect between the youth and the old generations, I feel like it's the constant conflict between the two is making it harder for the young voters to want to get involved with politics, especially with all the backlash and stuff that they might get in all the not like the lack of attention that they're getting in representation that they're getting. And I'd like to add that, don't you think it would be like unfair that a lot of these more established parties have more of a say than other ones because they have more funding to do that? And
sure. So
say their word, get their word.
there's a lot in there. So I think we can sum it up with an answer, right? Is that the incentives for young people to participate are not great, right? And with respect to other parties, we're going to have an interesting election year this year with, and I hope we'll get to this, right, with the no labels people, and what they're, planning to try and give folks an alternative.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring this in. So you were talking about how turnout is so important, right? And getting the parties getting people to turn out for their candidates, right? But what about the people that are undecided? You gave that statistic of what happened in Detroit. One of the statistics, I think my favorite statistic from the 2016 election is that 60,000 Democrats showed up, voted for every Democrat on the ballot except for Hillary Clinton, and she lost by 12,000 votes, right? So what about those people that are uncommitted? Do they have a choice? Does a third party make a difference? Are there third parties that are going to make a difference in this election?
I would say that there's a lot of hype around third parties, and the closer we get to the election, the less difference they make. Obviously, in a close election, everything's going to matter. But we can talk about no labels. It's basically some centrists got together, raised a bunch of money, tried to get a line on ballots in different states. They're going to nominate a Republican and a Democrat as a unity ticket for one for president, one for vice president. They're going to try to get on the ballot in every state. Honestly, I think it's going to go nowhere. All of the big names that they had talked about who showed interest are pretty much out of it. I think the last I read, the lieutenant governor of Georgia, whom I hadn't heard of until I looked it up, I'm sure none of you have heard of, is kind of their top pick for a candidate. So I don't think that's going anywhere. Robert Kennedy, or I think that Kennedy is probably the biggest threat to the major parties is that people could turn, that's like a very household name. People might turn to him, but he's definitely a fringe candidate and known for being kind of the biggest name in the anti-vaccine movement. So I don't see that as a viable third-party choice for a lot of people unless they happen to oppose vaccine. But I think he'll probably get more votes than whoever the no label party nominates.
Interesting. So this is one of the most interesting elements of this election cycle for me is that I don't disagree with any of that. I think that the possibilities for third party victories are so low, right? But more Americans than ever now are wanting a third party, wanting to see more than just the same old guys, right? And there's going to be, I mean, RFK Jr. is going to be on the ballot in a bunch of states. No labels is going to be on the ballot in probably all 50, if not, if not just a few shy.
Probably all of the swing states.
Oh, for sure, right? So, but are they going to win? It's hard to find a way. It's hard to find a path for their victory. However, they're going to be very important in that it is going to be close in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and RFK is getting what, 10, 11 points in the polls these days in Michigan? And if no labels gets even 5, right, there's 15% of the vote that they're going to throw it one way or the other.
Generally, third parties tend to do better in states that are not close. Like people are more interested in expressing that they don't like either candidate in an election that doesn't matter than in an election that matters. So I kind of doubt that as you get closer to election day that these third parties could actually hold that much percent of the vote in a swing state.
And that's because people don't want to quote unquote waste their vote, right? They don't want to be the spoiled. They want to back either the winner or the loser, right? And yeah.
I think the big question in this election is who are the double negatives going to vote for? The people who don't like Trump and don't like Biden. And they can dream of voting for someone else, but when it comes closer to the election, probably most of them are going to decide to vote for the candidate, the lesser of two evils, Because I think a lot of times they see the third party as not being in the choice between those two evils, or they think it's lesser than the other two evils.
I will quarrel with just one element of that, and it's not in terms of big numbers, but there's some interesting data from going back to 2016, right? What made it swing to Trump? Well, again, in another election year, when we had two incredibly unpopular presidential candidates, there were 75,000 people in Michigan who skipped the presidential race on the ballot. Just skipped past it and voted for whatever was down the ballot. Senate, I don't know if we had a Senate race that year or not, but US House, State House, Mayor, whatever, right? But they skipped the presidential race. And another 250,000 people voted third party. Jill Stein, who's running again, is she the Green Party nominee again? And whoever else was on the ballot as third party. So that was 250,000 people that voted third party in 2016, 5 times more than in 2012, right? Now, it's not a lot of votes, but it's enough to make a difference in the outcome, right?
Yes, and that's why I think that the message that you're gonna hear from the presidential candidate this season is fear of the other candidate. Because that's how they get people to not throw their vote away by expressing a preference for a third, is they make you feel like democracy is on the line, law and order is on the line, your pocketbook's on the line, your health is on the line. And I think that's gonna be the overriding message of this campaign, is how much worse the other candidate is gonna be.
Well, yeah, I wanted to ask, so you guys clearly seem to think that a third party has a low chance of winning, but how many votes would a third party need to gather for people to kind of change their mind that it's a waste of a vote in your guys?
Ooh, this question is, how many votes would the third party need to convince people that their vote wasn't wasted? I haven't thought about it that way before.
Do you think that if a third party, without winning, at least got more than a lot of people expected, maybe in the future election, it would be considered more legitimate?
Well, yes, if you get more votes than expected, in a future generation, there's campaign finance money that kicks in. And then that's what will attract a higher tier candidate to run for your third party if there's more money behind it. So I think it does matter, the percent of vote, but we've had third party candidates get substantial percentages of the vote. Ross Perot, 20%. It's just so hard to relay that into success in a future election. And it's so hard to relay that into success at lower levels of office as well. So I think that's kind of it's a kind of a chicken and an egg problem for the third parties, is how do you prove that you're not wasting your vote? You have to get enough people to waste their vote in order to prove that there's a constituency out there.
You know, I would imagine that threshold is different for a lot of different people, right? And, you know, because you might have some voters say, well, they're polling at like 25%. That's enough for, it seems like there's enough support, right? Or maybe it's 30%, but I think that it changes. But, you know, I think for it to really start to threaten the two-party system, they got to get 25, 28%, you know, and then you're having a conversation about real competition.
Double negative, with the Trump bias factor, right? Is there any concern with a lot of people that choosing not to vote for neither, not vote at all in like a ballot?
Back to the double negative, Nicole's double negative candidates. That's a good way to think about that. I like that. I'm gonna use it. I'll invite you out of it.
I didn't invent the term, but I don't know who did it.
Concerned with people skipping the ballot. I think so, yeah. And just saying, I can't vote for either of these clowns, right? I mean, they are incredibly flawed candidates, without a doubt. And I think that both of their campaigns ought to be concerned about the number of people who think that and will act on that by skipping the presidential.
I actually think it's gonna be a high turnout election. I don't think that's a big concern of the campaigns that people are gonna skip voting in this election. I think that when you have an organized effort for people to stay home, that's when you get concerned. So possibly it's this uncommitted vote for Biden by Arab American constituencies in Michigan, that they showed that people would come to the polling booth and write uncommitted on the ballot. I think that's something that could be a concern because that's an organized effort that,
Oh, I'm sorry.
so I think Biden's probably a little concerned about that, but I don't think they're concerned about people just being like, oh, I can't make a decision between these two guys. I'll just leave it blank and let everybody else decide. I don't think that's gonna be a big concern.
So going back to like how all like the presidents are like older and like how would that affect us? Because like as you get older, you get health problems and like all that. And like what happens if like they might not be able to like be like physically able to.
What if they can't serve out their term? Yeah.
So like, should we worry about that? And like, should there be a limit on how old you can be to be president, do you think?
So should we be worried that, that the winner won't serve out his term? Should there be age limits? I think that's about covers it, yeah. I certainly can't tell you, what to worry about or what not to worry about. I do think you are going to hear Donald Trump talk a lot about Joe Biden's age and the fact that if Biden doesn't serve out a term, you have President Harris, who frankly has worse polling numbers than Joe Biden. So I think that the Trump campaign will try to use that as a liability.
I don't think we need to be concerned about, presidents dying or becoming incapacitated because it's pretty clear in the Constitution what happened. What we do need to be concerned about is presidents kind of losing, the rational decision-making or like making errors that could, lead to problems. I think with either candidate, we're kind of depending on them surrounding themselves with people to hold the guardrails on. Maybe Biden, because he might, have lost a step since the previous election. And with Trump for probably multiple reasons, because I don't think he really likes guardrails. And also he is quite old also. So I think for both candidates, we really have to think about, where are we gonna be 4 years from now, and who are the people they're surrounding themselves with?
And with age limits, I think it's a quick response, because we got a couple more questions, but, you'd need a constitutional amendment to put limits on how old you could serve, how long you could serve. Oh, in the back, you had your hand up a bunch.
So you attributed, Macomb County as a integral part of the election here in 2024. So it leads me to my question, the effect that Donald Trump had on the ballot. If you look at previous election results, in Macomb County, it went blue, in 2018 for Clinton, in 2012 for Obama, and Macomb County didn't go red, until Bush, or since Bush, I should say. So what effect do you think Trump had on not only Macomb County, but other voters in the states?
Yeah, so the question about Macomb County, I think Macomb is a fascinating place politically, and it goes back to the 1980s. Macomb is famous in political science because of the so-called Reagan Democrats, and those are folks in Macomb County who considered themselves Democrats, but voted for Ronald Reagan because they thought he said what he meant and meant what he said, that he was going to stand up for the country, that there was tough talk and tough action, and they loved him for it. Yet they continue to vote for other Democratic candidates, right? Well, fast forward to 2016, and Reagan Democrats are back with a vengeance and love what they hear from Donald Trump on issues like NAFTA the Trans-Pacific Partnership, manufacturing jobs. And he wins over, a swath of Macomb County that was not voting Republican previously and maybe wasn't voting at all previously. And that really leads to I think, it's one of those elements that leads to his 11,000 vote victory in 2016. Much like African Americans didn't show up for Clinton, like we talked about, Clinton got 35,000 fewer votes in Macomb County than Barack Obama did, and Trump got 35,000 more votes in Macomb County than Mitt Romney did. Now, that's not 35,000, that went from Obama to Trump, but there's 6, 7, 8,000 that did so. And I think Macomb County is now, they're no longer Reagan Democrats. I think they're Trump Republicans. Because you see in 22, right, all the countywide offices except sheriff went Republican, which is just the exact opposite of Oakland County. I think it's absolutely fascinating.
The other key thing about Macomb County is you got an airport close to here, so you're gonna see a lot of candidates just fly in, get their feet on the airport tarmac and fly out.
You just made Nicole's life a lot. Let's go. We have a question over here.
This is outside of Michigan. Well, my grandmother and my whole family does a lot of outside the United States people, Australia and everything. And people told us that because of Trump and Biden being our candidates for president, the United States has become thought of as a joke. And because of who our presidents are. What do you guys think of this? Like, do you think that Trump and Biden are having a negative impact on people of the United States?
So what's the impact of Joe Biden and Donald Trump being our presidential candidates on the sort of reputation of the United States or how we're seen in the world? This is a terribly unsatisfying answer, but I mean, I don't know. That's a terrible answer, but it's an honest one. I'm sure some people are like, are you guys kidding me? Right? I mean, come on. But don't forget, right? I mean, you've got other world leaders like Vladimir Putin that's out there, and he's that's a pretty good comparison when you've got either Trump or Biden and some other.
Oh, because they're old?
Well, they're old, but he's trying to take over the world.
Yeah. Right, other countries elect jokers all the time, and it's fine. Like, in Ukraine, they elected somebody who was on a TV show where he ran for president on the TV show, and it turned out he was a great president. Like,
Argentina too, right? They got a guy he's like Trump on steroids.
Yeah, I will say though that I think if you look at what other leaders around the world are interested in from an American president, Republican, Democrat doesn't matter. I think they want someone predictable, and I think even your enemies of the United States would rather deal with Joe Biden because he's predictable than deal with a wild card like Donald Trump. I don't know if that should affect how we decide our elections, what foreign leaders would want. I think Europe is more interested in working with Biden. He's definitely more open to the NATO partnership than Trump has been. So I think, yeah, there's definitely consequences for the rest of the world.
Yeah, in the middle, let's take these two hands. Sarah first. Yeah.
So what information could you give us the Project 2024 for Trump, like going on with the election and stuff like that?
Can you repeat that? I couldn't quite catch it.
For the Trump 2024 project thing, like what information could you give us on about that? Just because that's what he's leading with, like where his election goes for the next election.
So party platforms, Project 2025, like the party platforms, what kind of issues are they focused on? What Project 2025 in terms of like what their plans are?
Agenda.
Yeah, the agendas. Yep, and platforms.
Honestly, I think party platforms are one of the most useless things in American politics.
Well, the Republicans didn't write one last time.
So
They
there you go.
copy-paste last time platform.
Because nobody pays attention to them, right? I mean, these things will technically be written at the national conventions over the summer. And nobody gives a rip about what's in any of it. All they care about is, Trump and Biden and who's gonna win, right? I think.
I think Biden's gonna come out with a very populist message to kind of counter some of the Trump populism. You saw a little bit of, well, I don't know if you watched the State of the Union, but he came out with kind of like a tax credit for first-time home buyers. He's canceling student loan debt. He's, gonna keep the tax cuts for people making under 400,000, raise it on people over 400,000. So you get kind of an idea of where he's going with his economic policies. Trump obviously is gonna stand by his tax cuts from his that he enacted as president and be the friend of business and probably focus on the border heavily.
Immigration, right? I mean, I think that's front and center, for Trump. And it's also high in the list of priorities for the American people too.
Like, going back to like the third party talk, I feel like a lot of social media talk about Robert Kennedy, and some young voters are pretty much like being center on social media, and they're pretty hard to predict during like voting turnout. Is that something that could make it different? Like,
Oh, just wait till your TikTok gets turned off next week. They're thinking about this week about, they aren't necessarily gonna end TikTok, but they're kind of forcing the sale of the ownership sale of TikTok. Yeah, so I think that some candidates can kind of achieve a niche audience in social media. It's gonna be hard for Kennedy to reach out. He did have an ad during the Super Bowl, which I found very interesting. And he's really gonna be relying on kind of some niche appeal.
Yeah.
that would be how the air report Biden. Do you feel like, what do you think the effects of that your community taking that step and voting on the ballot in the primary?
Effect of, the Arab American population, Arab American voting population on Biden.
Yeah, well, what I have from your question is that it's not so happy being the incumbent these days. It's easy to win your primary, but when it comes to the general election, it's just, in the past few decades, presidential approval rating is just not what it used to be. And we might be entering a period where we have some one-term presidencies. We went through a period of failed presidencies in like the 1960s, 1970s, before we started having really a lot of two-term presidencies. But a lot of people, just whatever's going wrong, blame who's in charge. And so normally I think incumbency works to the advantage of a candidate, but when it comes to president, it's hard to please everybody.
So I think you make a really good comparison between Trump and Biden there about being in trouble in their reelection year, right? And I happen to think that Joe Biden is probably the most vulnerable incumbent president that we've had, more so than Trump, simply because Trump and his base are so loyal, right? I mean, I happen to think that the uncommitted vote in the primary should be a major warning sign to President Biden. And I think you're seeing his stance on Israel soften in the last week or so, which I think is also dangerous for him politically, because should he shift, it appears that he is going in that direction. He's going to alienate people who support his current policy, right? To try to get some of the Arab American vote back. And I'm not sure he can, because what happens in Israel and Gaza isn't up to Joe Biden, right? He can't control that policy. He can rhetorically talk about it, but that's about it.
I do think that his problem with what's going on in Gaza extends beyond the Arab American vote, mainstream Americans, that we're getting more reporting about the conditions in Gaza, and there's divides in the Democratic Party, and I think even people that are core supporters of Israel are saying, well, maybe not this way.
Yeah, I think that it's gonna continue to, split the Democratic Party, and the wedge is gonna be, it's gonna change the percentages, right, or ratio of, support or oppose the Israel policy. Yeah, I think that's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, they had a lot of questions about this, sort of like the biggest liabilities that the candidates face, especially in Michigan. And then you answered that question about the Arab American vote. What about Trump, though, too, and his indictments? People had questions about that. Do you think that those Arab Americans that voted uncommitted will come back home, as they say, to the party? Or also, if Trump does happen to be convicted of one of his indictments, will that push people in the Republican Party away from him, even people you say are the most committed of voters?
I think we're kind of, it looks like Trump might be running down the clock on some of these indictments, that we might not be able to get the trials in before before November. We'll see. I do think that, that Trump does have a problem because he has a base of supporters that just love him. And he has other people that, they've been maybe lifelong Republicans that are not keen on him, and they will vote for him if they have to, but they don't want to. And I think Trump's gut feeling is, I need to lean into my fans, and I think that is maybe not the best campaign strategy. So I think with the indictment, that his goal is going to be to paint the Democrats as being out to get him. He's the most persecuted president ever. Forget the ones who were actually assassinated. And kind of rev up his base with like how sorry they should feel for him for all this persecution. And I don't think that necessarily plays to moderates. And so I think not the outcome of the indictments is going to matter, but how Trump tries to use the indictment in his favor, and I think he might be at risk of using it the wrong way.
I think the vast majority of the folks that voted uncommitted in the primary will end up voting for Joe Biden. But there were 100,000, that's a lot of people. If 10% don't, combine that with the Kennedy voters and maybe some other, and then maybe the youth vote, right? In another way, if there people are like, if Biden's too old, now you're talking, right? Then you've got enough to swing the outcome. I said before, I think this might be the most issueless campaign that we've had, right? And I think a lot of it's going to be the double negatives that feed that, certainly fear, but also just Trump's going to say Biden's too old, and Biden's going to say Trump's a criminal. I mean, that's just going to boil down to.
Yeah, I think what you'll see as we get closer to the election is that people may not have been paying attention to everything that Trump said, and you're going to see ad after ad of Trump saying really crazy things, and Biden presenting himself as the only rational alternative to that. And as we get closer to election, people are going to pay more attention to that. People aren't paying attention right now to as much the crazy things that he says.
And don't you think the next ad on television, or the next ad that comes up on a YouTube video, would then be Biden stumbling or not being able to get through a sentence, right? I mean, that's what it's going to come down to.
Mason, you had a question?
Yeah, so this might be a bit of just like a more extreme side of it. But with the last presidential election, you saw this insurrection that happened on, I think, on January 6th. Don't you think there are going to be like more protests or something akin to that in this upcoming election, or something more of this extreme when you come to these two candidates and the people's just general distaste with this current election that's going on?
Let me real quick, we have 1 minute left, so I'm going to entertain that question if you would, and then one more that ties into this is that I got from a lot of people too is, we hear this idea from both sides that democracy is under attack. What do you take on those claims kind of more broadly? And then specifically, can people trust their vote?
Oh, like, that's a question for the clerk.
We have him here.
So I think, I don't know, I think people are riled up. You know, I think you will see demonstrations, and we can only hope that they're not violent. I mean, that's, I think, all we can say at this point. I happen to think, and I know we're running out of time, because this is opens a whole other can of worms. I happen to think that you know, democracy is in trouble. I think that is overplayed and overstated. Because we've heard it for years now, and we're having an election, and it's gonna be okay. The American system, I think, is strong enough to survive it. What was the other part? There were three. Oh, can you trust your vote? Of course you can. When you've got a clerk like Tony Fellini.
I think that there was an unusual level of mistrust in 2020 because a lot